I will never forget the sound of Karen's shrieks echoing from inside my barn as she pounded desperately on the thick wooden doors. The muffled screams mixed with the deep, warning snorts of thunder and lightning, my two champion bulls, created a symphony of consequence that, I have to admit, was oddly satisfying. As I stood in my front yard sipping my morning coffee, watching Sheriff Wilson's cruiser roll up my gravel driveway, I felt not an ounce of remorse. The flashing blue and red lights reflected off the morning dew on the grass, almost festive against the dawn sky. I took another slow sip from my mug, savoring both the rich Colombian blend and the moment. Karen had finally crossed the line, literally and figuratively, and now she was learning exactly what trespassing on my property really meant. The Double J Ranch has been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandfather built this place with his bare hands, and it's been passed down through the Johnson family ever since. When my father passed 3 years ago, I inherited not just the 200 acres of prime agricultural land, but also his passion for raising championship bulls. Our livestock has won blue ribbons at state fairs across 3 states, and Thunder and Lightning, my prized Black Angus bulls, are worth more than most people's houses. They're gentle giants when you know how to handle them, but they're also 1,200 pounds of pure muscle, with horns that could gore through a car door if they felt threatened. This is why we have strict protocols, specific handling procedures, and very clear, no trespassing signs posted every 50 feet around the property. My problem started about 2 years ago when the Sunny Meadows housing development broke ground at the edge of my eastern property line. Suddenly, my century-old working ranch was bordering a cookie-cutter suburban neighborhood full of people who had never spent a day of their lives around livestock. Leading the charge of complaints was Karen Wilkinson, president of the Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association. From day one, she made it her personal mission to civilize the eyesore, as she once called my ranch during a town council meeting. First, it was complaints about the occasional smell when the wind blew in their direction. Then it was noise complaints about my roosters crowing at dawn. Most recently, she had been filing weekly reports with animal control, claiming I was neglecting my livestock. An accusation that boiled my blood considering how meticulously I care for every animal on my property. Last Tuesday, I received yet another certified letter from the Homeowners Association threatening legal action if I didn't address the unsanitary conditions of my ranch. The allegations were completely baseless, of course. My ranch passes every inspection with flying colors, and the County Agricultural Board has even used my property as an example of proper livestock management during their annual training sessions. Still, Karen's relentless campaign was becoming more than just an annoyance. It was starting to affect my reputation in the community. I had consulted my lawyer, who assured me she had no legal grounds but advised documentation of any further harassment just in case. That's why I had upgraded my security system the previous month, installing motion-activated cameras around the property, particularly near the barns and animal enclosures. It was early yesterday morning when my phone buzzed with a security alert. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when the notification came through, showing movement near the south barn, the one where I keep Thunder and Lightning. At first I assumed it was just one of my ranch hands arriving early for the morning feeding, but when I opened the app and checked the footage, my coffee mug nearly slipped from my fingers. There, clear as day, was Karen Wilkinson herself, dressed in what appeared to be her idea of farm clothes, pressed khakis and a polo shirt, sneaking along the side of my barn with her phone in hand, clearly recording. I watched in disbelief as she tested the barn door, found it unlocked. We rarely lock the barns during the day when staff are working around the property, and slipped inside. I couldn't believe the audacity. She was trespassing on private property, disturbing my livestock, all to gather some kind of fabricated evidence for her crusade against my ranch. I quickly threw on my boots and jacket and headed out to confront her, but something made me pause on my porch. The security feed on my phone showed she had moved deeper into the barn, and to my horror, she was approaching the gate that led to the bull's stalls. Any person with an ounce of farm knowledge would know better than to approach unfamiliar bulls without proper handling procedures. The warning signs were clearly posted: danger, bull enclosure, authorized personnel only. But Karen, in her infinite wisdom, was pushing open that very gate, her phone held out in front of her like some sort of shield. I watched the feed as she stepped confidently into the penned area, apparently oblivious to the danger she was putting herself in. That's when I saw Thunder raise his massive head from the feeding trough, his dark eyes focusing on the intruder in his space. Lightning, always the more temperamental of the two, was already pawing at the ground, a warning sign that any experienced handler would recognize immediately. Karen, however, was completely ignorant of the bull's body language, continuing to film what she probably thought would be her smoking gun evidence of neglect. She had no idea she had just walked into one of the most dangerous situations possible on a cattle ranch. At that moment, I had a choice to make. I could rush in and potentially startle the bulls further, creating an even more dangerous situation, or I could handle this more strategically. I chose the latter. Moving quickly but calmly, I made my way to the barn's main entrance. I could hear Karen inside, her voice raised as she narrated her little documentary. As you can see, these poor animals are kept in these tiny stalls. I almost laughed at the absurdity. The bull enclosure was over 3,000 square feet of open space, far exceeding the recommended area for healthy bulls, but I had more pressing concerns than her ignorance about proper livestock housing. Reaching the main control panel by the barn entrance, I made a decision that would teach Karen a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. Our barn is equipped with a modern livestock containment system, a series of remotely controlled gates and doors, designed for safe handling of large animals. Instead of rushing in, I simply pressed the sequence that would secure the internal gates while closing the main barn doors. The mechanism engaged with a heavy mechanical thud, and I heard Karen's self-righteous narration cut off abruptly. There was a moment of silence, followed by the sound of her footsteps hurrying toward the now closed main doors. "Hello, is someone there? The door seems to be stuck." Her voice had lost its confident edge, replaced by growing confusion. I didn't respond, instead taking out my phone and dialing Sheriff Wilson's direct number. Jim Wilson had been sheriff in our county for nearly 15 years, and his family had been friends with mine for generations. He answered on the second ring. "Morning, Jim. It's John Johnson over at Double J Ranch. I hate to bother you so early, but I've got a situation here I think requires your attention. I've got an intruder on my property." I explained the situation, making sure to emphasize that I had video evidence of the trespass and that at no point had I invited Karen onto my land. The sheriff assured me he'd be over within 20 minutes. In the meantime, Karen's confusion had turned to anger, then to demand, and finally to something approaching panic as she realized her predicament. "Let me out of here right now. This is kidnapping. I know exactly who you are, Johnson, and you won't get away with this." Her fist pounded against the heavy barn doors, but they were designed to contain animals weighing over 1,000 pounds. They weren't going to budge from her efforts. I could hear the bulls snorting and moving around, clearly agitated by the commotion she was creating. Under normal circumstances, I would never leave anyone in an enclosure with agitated bulls, but I could see on my phone's security feed that Thunder and Lightning were maintaining their distance. They were alert and wary of the stranger, but not charging, at least not yet. Karen, meanwhile, had backed herself against the barn wall, finally seeming to grasp the potential danger of her situation. I walked over to the intercom system we use to communicate between buildings on the ranch and pressed the button for the south barn. "Mrs. Wilkinson, this is John Johnson. You are currently trespassing on private property. The police have been called and are on their way. I suggest you remain still and quiet. The bulls will not harm you if you don't agitate them further." There was a brief silence before her voice came back, trembling but still defiant. "You can't do this. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. I was just investigating reports of animal neglect. You're deliberately threatening me with these beasts." I couldn't help but chuckle at her choice of words. Thunder and Lightning were indeed powerful animals, but anyone who worked with bulls knew they weren't mindless beasts. They were intelligent, sometimes temperamental, but generally predictable if you understood their behavior. Unfortunately for Karen, she knew nothing about bulls except what she'd probably seen in cartoons. Those beasts, Mrs. Wilkinson, our champion Black Angus bull's worth more than your luxury SUV. They're not threatening you. They're defending their territory, which you invaded without permission. Had you bothered to ask for a proper tour of my facility, instead of breaking in, you would have been given proper safety instructions. I released the intercom button and turned away, spotting Sheriff Wilson's cruiser coming up the driveway right on time. As the sheriff stepped out of his vehicle, I could see he was trying to maintain his professional demeanor, but the slight curve of his lips told me he was amused by the situation. I greeted him with a firm handshake and briefly explained what had happened, showing him the security footage on my phone. His eyebrows rose as he watched Karen clearly trespassing and entering restricted areas despite multiple warning signs. "You still in there with the bulls?" he asked, his voice a mixture of concern and disbelief. I nodded and assured him that the animals, while agitated, were keeping their distance, and the containment system would prevent any real danger. Still, we both agreed it was time to extract Karen from her self-imposed predicament. The sheriff followed me to the barn, and I disengaged the main door lock while keeping the interior gates secured. The scene that greeted us when we opened the barn doors was almost comical. Karen Wilkinson, the mighty Homeowners Association president who had been making my life difficult for months, was curled up on a hay bale in the corner, as far from the bulls as possible. Her immaculately styled hair was disheveled, her designer farm clothes were covered in dust and hay, and her face was a mask of indignation and poorly concealed fear. Thunder and lightning were on the opposite side of the enclosure, watching her with what I swear looked like bovine amusement. "Thank goodness you're here, Sheriff," Karen exclaimed, springing to her feet once she realized help had arrived. This man locked me in here with these dangerous animals. I want him arrested for attempted murder." Sheriff Wilson's face remained impressively neutral as he helped her out of the enclosure, though I could see the effort it took him not to react to her dramatic accusations. "Ma'am, before we go making allegations, I need to understand why you were inside Mr. Johnson's barn without permission," the sheriff said calmly, guiding her toward the entrance. Karen straightened her rumpled clothes, attempting to reclaim some dignity. I received multiple reports from concerned citizens about the conditions of animals on this property. As a community leader, it's my responsibility to investigate such claims, she declared. Her chin lifted defiantly. Sheriff Wilson nodded slowly, then turned to me. "Mr. Johnson, may I have your permission to show Mrs. Wilkinson the security footage?" I nodded, handing him my phone. The sheriff pulled up the footage showing Karen sneaking onto my property, testing doors and deliberately entering the barn while filming. Her face fell as she watched herself documented so clearly, breaking the law. "Mrs. Wilkinson, what I'm seeing here is clear evidence of trespassing on private property, entering a clearly marked restricted area, and potentially endangering livestock valued at over $100,000 each." The sheriff's voice had lost all trace of amusement, replaced by professional sternness. "Were you aware that interfering with agricultural operations can carry significant penalties in this county?" Karen's mouth opened and closed several times like a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. I was acting in the public interest," she stammered, but even she seemed to realize how weak that excuse sounded. The sheriff shook his head. "I think the proper channel for reporting suspected animal neglect is through the County Animal Control Office, who would then conduct an official inspection, not breaking onto private property and filming without consent." He pulled out his citation book and began writing. "I'm citing you for criminal trespassing, unauthorized entry into a livestock containment area, and reckless endangerment of valuable livestock. Consider yourself fortunate that Mr. Johnson secured the area rather than allowing you to further agitate those bulls, or we might be dealing with a much more serious situation right now." Karen's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "This is ridiculous. I'm a taxpayer. I'll have your badge for this. And as for you," she turned to me, finger pointed accusingly, "the Homeowners Association will make sure you regret this. We have bylaws, and your outdated, smelly farm is violating every single one of them." Sheriff Wilson let out a surprisingly hearty laugh at this outburst. "Mrs. Wilkinson, Perhaps you're unaware that Mr. Johnson's property falls outside the jurisdiction of your homeowners association by about 2 miles. His ranch was established long before your development was even planned, and it's protected under the county's agricultural heritage statutes. He handed her the citation. Now I suggest you sign this and be on your way before Mr. Johnson decides to press additional charges for the damages your little expedition may have caused to his operation. The look on Karen's face was worth every complaint letter, every town council meeting, and every threatening message I'd endured over the past 2 years. She signed the citation with a shaking hand, thrust it back at the sheriff, and stormed toward her car, which was parked haphazardly by my front gate. Before she got in, she turned back, her face contorted with humiliation and rage. "This isn't over, Johnson. Nobody makes a fool of me and gets away with it." Sheriff Wilson and I watched as she drove away, gravel spraying from her tires. "You know she's going to be trouble," he commented, tucking the citation book back into his pocket. I nodded, but for the first time in months, I wasn't worried about Karen Wilkinson's threats. "I've already called my lawyer," I told him. "After today's stunt, we have everything we need for a restraining order and a cease and desist against both her and the homeowners association. They've crossed from harassment into criminal trespassing, and it stops now." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "Smart move. Document everything and follow through with those legal actions. People like that only understand consequences." He tipped his hat and headed back to his cruiser, but paused before getting in. "By the way, how are Thunder and Lightning doing after all the excitement?" I glanced back at the barn, where my 2 champion bulls were now calmly returning to their morning feed, the drama already forgotten in their bovine minds. "They're fine. Takes more than one hysterical HOA president to rattle those 2. As promised, I had my lawyer deliver cease and desist letters to both Karen personally and the Homeowners Association board by the end of the day. The letters outlined the pattern of harassment, included copies of the security footage, and made it abundantly clear that any further attempts to interfere with my property or livestock would result in immediate legal action. 2 days later, a formal apology arrived from the Homeowners Association board, distancing themselves from Karen's unauthorized actions and assuring me they had no intention of pursuing any complaints against my ranch operations. A week passed without a single complaint call, town council petition, or passive-aggressive letter. The silence was almost disconcerting after months of constant battles. Then, yesterday morning, I was driving past the entrance to Sunny Meadows when I noticed something that made me slow down. A "for sale" sign had appeared in front of Karen Wilkinson's corner lot home, the one with the meticulously manicured lawn and the towering flagpole that violated the very HOA height restrictions she so zealously enforced on others. Later that day, I installed new signs on all my gates. Under the standard no trespassing warnings, these new signs read, "Warning, bulls bite, trespassers cry." And beneath each sign I mounted small, unobtrusive security cameras, just in case anyone else decided to test whether I meant business. But somehow I doubt I'll have trouble with uninvited visitors from Sunny Meadows anytime soon. Word travels fast in small towns, and the story of how Karen spent 30 terrifying minutes locked in a barn with 2 champion bulls had already become local legend.